Yeah, so we've got this 1970 Power Wagon over here that a customer brings to me, and we've done several trucks for him, but very, very, again, one-off truck, which is what we're known for. He brought it to me and he says, well, I want to get, more power out of it. It's a very custom truck. The Far East Fab did all the suspension work to it. It's been around the country. It is a showstopper truck, and thankfully we've been blessed. He says, I want you to build me an engine setup. I want you to, do the world on different turbos or whatever you want to come up with, just you name it. And so I'm looking at this thing and I'm like, man, all this suspension setup, the way the hoops are, the suspension joints, all these things, so such an intricate piece. And so we wound up coming up with a really cool game plan that is actually going to hit the Baja, the Canada and Mexico run here very soon as we're done with it. So we're going to end up building an engine for this truck, and we're going to take it to a nice, 600 to 800 horsepower, nothing insane, but super clean, to the point of we're custom fabbing it, compound turbos. However, the turbo system that we're getting is actually through VE diesel, but we're kind of putting a spin on that. We're changing the charge tubing. We're going to be TIG welding and pie cutting all the different joints. What we're going to do, how we're going to lay it into the system. What we're doing with the VE pump. So obviously this is a VE engine. It's a 1993 12 valve with an NV 4500 and a 1970 cab with a 93 Dodge frame. It is super Frankenstein, but so cool. When this truck was brought to me, it was already finished as far as suspension and paint, but the engine still needed some love. So we wound up coming up with a really cool game plan that's going to be able to take this truck and actually run it and compete it in Baja. High RPMs, clean, compound turbos, in a 1970 Power Wagon. Today we're working on the 1970 Power Wagon Build. I know you guys have been watching this a lot. As a big part of this, we obviously made some decisions to have different engine platforms, and like we said before, we did end up choosing the industrial injection 12 valve VE powertrain. So this one was a really cool setup for what we're doing, to not bring too much horsepower in, but have just enough to do what we need to do. Obviously, if you want 1,000 horse up, they can supply you with that. But we are keeping this range within that 500 to 600, really raspy, really quick setup. So with industrial stuff, obviously all new valve train, springs, guides, retainers, ARP head studs, non-firing head gasket. We're still going with the Cummins OE head gasket. Doing all their PDM billet frost plugs and on the side and on the rear, and then also the PDM tappet cover. Those are really awesome for engines like this that don't need the side draft, because we're going to bring a little bit of different draft situation out of the top of the engine, so we didn't need the side draft. But really what it boils down to is bringing the right amount of parts into the right amount of horsepower. If you overbuild it, obviously overbuilding is great, but for this, really don't want to do that. We're kind of trying to meet a different engine to classic style. If it's too way out of the gate, then it's just going to be a problem. So this one, like I said, is an industrial VE setup. So this is still working from an 89 to 93 platform, still utilizing the VE pump. We are not P-pump swapping this thing. It is still going to be on the stock fueling platform. Obviously some additional modifications are on that, but the whole overall consensus is the industrial injection PDM setup. It's an awesome setup. The amount of machining they do, the quality and the precision of their work, their cylinder head work, grinding of the crank and the cam, and all this stuff is really precise. They do a really good job, and the setup and the color, we really schemed with the interior of the truck. So we're going to bring that interior color out of the vehicle and bring it in to the engine aesthetics. And so with industrial setup, they met every single requirement we needed for the build, which is why we reached out to them. Great engine company. They saw obviously a lot of parts, but this is why we chose the VE from industrial injection. Hey guys, so last week we talked about the 1970 Power Wagon Build. Really excited again. We talked a lot about how rigid this thing was going to be. We talked about how insane the platform is that we're working with. Well, we finally got the industrial injection VE setup, and then also the VE diesel compound turbo system. So after all the mock-up, we're getting really close to being finished. Everything's got to get sent off the powder coat. We pulled the engine and dialing some things in prior and post, obviously during the build, because things changed during the build. But during this one, after we got the engine out, we did the mock-up prior, on the old engines that we know is going to fit perfect around the Baja caging system, the way the suspension towers work, the way the downstream exhaust, everything is, it fits really seamless. It's a really awesome setup. So we took a lot of time doing mock-up, and obviously do that in the old engine. That way we know everything is going to fit just perfect. So when it comes into custom trucks, obviously we do a lot of custom trucks, so we know what we're looking for, we know what we're doing. But this one, again, though, is so super exciting. This is obviously a huge engine bay, but when everything's together, it is not as big as you would think because you've got all the Baja caging stuff. So we had a lot of battles to kind of work through on it, but at the same time didn't really take very long because the components we're using were really dialed in out of the gate. Obviously minus the interchange piping and a lot of the stuff on the charge tubing side, that was different. But then obviously this truck being converted into a 12 valve versus a gas engine. So, at Tombstone Diesel, we really focus in being able to build anything. But really what it came down to, we were able to put some science to it, bring the towers in, with how the suspension setup is, the way we work the charge system. The engine side, it did have a 12 valve in it before, but we were able to take that and kind of put a spin on it and bring this beautiful masterpiece. So in the meantime, while all this is mocked up, there's still a few things we're going to change, but we're going to be sending this out to powder coat, and as soon as it gets back from powder coat, we're going to be bringing in the final platform. At that time, you're going to start seeing the installation and the final product of how this is actually going to sit in there. And then during the fire up times, there's going to be a lot of things involved, pump timing, different fueling stuff that we're going to be dealing with, and some slight changes. And like we said, it's a custom truck, but that's what we do. And please continue to look forward to the awesome build of this 1970 Power Wagon. We're getting really close, really excited, and stay tuned. Welcome back to the 70 Power Wagon build at Tombstone Diesel. So last week we talked about the VE setup we got from Industrial, the BD compound kit we got from BD Diesel, and showed you a little bit of the outside mock-up when the engine was out of the truck. So we got the engine in, and we got the turbos in, minus the air housings and a lot of the piping, obviously, because these are all still at powder coat. So the majority of the components that you're seeing that are bare right now, because those are all getting powder coated along with the piping, a lot of other odds and ends. But you can see, as we talked about last week, how tight the fitment was on the turbo side. So the caging system, for these humongous ADS triple bypass suspension, that's where this came into play with the exhaust housing on the turbocharger for the manifold side. So it was super tight. We ended up modifying that exhaust housing, get it within really close tolerance, but still accepting a heat blanket, making everything fit really tight, but into a perfect fit. We ended up changing the wastegate on it and going into a stainless diesel wastegate, the spring gate, but we did end up modifying it to, again, fit this. So we just measure the spring tension, make sure that we're still going to gauge at our appropriate boost pressure to make sure everything still is going to work within the same thing. So the next piece of modification we had to do, we ended up putting in the Tombstone Diesel AN drain lock. So this engine on the configuration didn't really want to accept that just because it's in a Power Wagon and on an older style VE single drain system. So we ended up using the engine mount as our spacer, going into a high shank on the insert for the block, and it still was able to accept the drain lock in there. That way, when we're pushing this thing hard, it's not going to pop that drain out of the block. And then ended up welding a JIC into the oil pan to accept the atmosphere charger. So we're still running two drains. We're not wiring into one. A lot of people do that. We like separating those so we get full drain capacity, so we know those chargers are going to stay really lubricated and cooled, and there's no restriction. So we like running dual drains on everything when we can. Single drains really not appropriate for this build because we're going to be pushing a lot of power and a lot of oil flow. A lot of things come into play with heat and temperature with that. And then also on the plumbing side, we ended up building all of the AN style oil feed and drain lines. We went through and built all these from scratch. Obviously, your heat shrink tubing, your high heat, heat wrap, keeping everything away from the manifold. So we're working with different styles of 120-degree fittings, 90-degree fittings, straight fittings, to keep everything away from the manifold, keep everything away from the hot sides of the chargers, keeping the oil drain accessible to actually change the oil instead of running a straight fitting. We ran a 45 fitting on that so you can actually still drain his oil. But all of these are really high tensile strength, all AN stuff. and then high temperature rated obviously also, because of how tight it is, how tight everything is. We want to make sure nothing's going to melt down. We're not going to have an oil line rupture, anything like that. So we're thinking really precautionary measures, being that if we're not there in Baja to service this thing, we know that nothing is going to break. So look forward to the upcoming week. Like I said, hopefully next week we should have all these parts back from powder coat, and then as soon as we get all assembled, we'll get the rest of the parts installed, and we'll hopefully have this thing down here really quick. So stay tuned. We'll talk to you next week. So last week we showed you guys the stages of where we were, the parts being removed from the engine, waiting for powder coat, the front clip is off, radiator, intercooler, everything was still out. When we got our parts back from powder coat, we're getting to our final stages to put together. We got the front clip back on, intercooler, radiator, valve covers, breathers, air housings, intercooler tubes, charge tubes, intake system, you name it. Pretty much everything is back together. There's a few button-up parts we got to finish. It was really fun to do the final stages of this, because we really got to see the challenges that we worked through to get to this point. Originally we were going to bring the charge air system around the cage to keep everything away from that cage, but we really want to put a cool spin on it of bringing it through the cage. So when you're seeing the engine articulate, those intercooler tubes and charge tubes are actually working with the cage. Cage is, sitting static, engine's moving, so everything is really articulating within that cage. So it really turned out really great. Also keeping in mind, we were flexing the suspension to make sure that the ADS 3.0 shocks were not going to intrude on the charge tubing. So we gave it every option possible measure without being able to drive the truck. So when we actually go and run this truck, that everything is going to be in the right spot that it needs to be. Aesthetically, everything turned out really awesome. The color scheme was beautiful. We matched the brown tone with the interior. I really feel like we nailed this one, and especially with before fire up, with the way everything is sitting, it turned out really awesome. I guess the final measure of this is once we get the final put together on a few of the breather system stuff, the canister for all the purge, and then on the breather system for the crankcase ventilation. Once we get all that stuff dialed in, we'll be ready to get this for a drive and really articulate it, move it, put the power to it, break the engine in. As far as the break-in goes, we're gonna kind of push it right out of the gate, but we do have all the driven engine oil from industrial for all the break-ins, so we know this thing's gonna break in solid, but we also really wanna see what it's gonna do and put it to the test right out of the gate. We built a solid setup. I mean, temperature-wise, this thing's gonna run great. Everything is, electronically cooled, but still running a lot of mechanical features. So a lot of new integration into the old network of a system. But again, on the charge system, it was really a tight fit. And next week, once we get all the finishing touches done on the engine, we're gonna start doing our road testing, our tuning, turning the fuel up, backing it down, seeing where all the happy mediums are at, making sure our charge pressures are working good, make sure the gate's operating the way it's supposed to, make sure our temperatures are good. So there's gonna be a lot of tweaking and adjustments that are still gonna be made, but look forward to that. It's gonna be a fun event. It's gonna be really exciting. We finally got the 1970 Power Wagon finished up. Travis with Tombstone Diesel in Castle Rock, Colorado, out in the beautiful Rocky Mountains, getting to test the 1970 Beast. This thing rips, it's awesome, it runs cool, it just jives in every aspect. From mountain passes, straightaways, just cruising at light speeds to 80 miles an hour. This thing handles like it's on rails. The power is amazing, the drivability is fantastic. I can't say enough good things about the build. It was just a total crush, it was awesome. Really enjoyed this build.
My name's Dave Ullman, and I'm standing in front of my 1970 Dodge Power Wagon. It's a swept line, and it's classified as a W200. I first met Travis at Bandimere Raceway. I was watching him drag down the drag strip, and I was actually at a car show at the Bandimere. It was kind of a race and shine or something like that car show, and I had brought my 74 Power Wagon to him. or to the show. And then I had the opportunity of just kind of talking story with him a little bit. And then I made the decision of calling him a few days later to set up an appointment to bring my 74 to him and just have him kind of look at the engine, see if there was anything that we can do to just kind of spruce it up and make it come alive a little bit. And that's where I really got to meet him, and I really got a chance to kind of pick his brain, and I kind of call him a diesel savant. You know, he is just so knowledgeable, and knowledgeable in a very practical sense. You know, he's not trying to build you some ridiculous system. He just wants to kind of bring engines to life and do what's best for the vehicle. And that's kind of where I met him. So we worked on the 74 and was just ecstatic on how that came out. He did a compound system for that. Absolutely love it. And then told him I was working on a 70 at the time, but I had just bought it and just dropped it off into Farias in Vegas. And I told him, well, I'd love for him to look at it, you know, when that's all done. And that's kind of how it all went. Got to see his old shop, and he's now since moved to his new location, and was blown away at just the cleanliness of his shop and just how knowledgeable he is. And he just really wants to pick your brain. What are you looking for? And then he'll build you something within the confinements of what you really want. And I think he always takes it to the next level. And he's an amazing guy. It's definitely everything I wanted and more. You know, I looked for reliability. I'm not gonna be dragging it, but my first impression, I got little teasers and pictures throughout the build. So when I saw it in person, it was tremendously more impressive than what pictures can even provide for it. Just the way it starts up, the way the throttle feels, it just feels more solid. It feels more reliable. We're still in the break-in stage on it. I've gotten into it, probably not to Travis's liking. I probably didn't put my foot into it enough because the power really kicks in on the higher end and the higher RPMs. And you can definitely feel it. It's amazing. And I'm not blowing coal everywhere. Shifting just feels better. The throttle response feels better. It's more immediate. And I just feel like I'm gonna get to my destination, you know, and that's a really good feeling.
If you are looking for something like this, we can build it for you. Tombstone Diesel, Castle Rock, Colorado.